I have lived in Sable Creek my whole life, and I have seen men hanged and children buried, and a whole street burned down in one dry August night. But I never saw the town go quiet the way it did the morning Vera Hale came back. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesday was the day the freight came in, and the boardwalk was always full of men leaning on posts, waiting on their flour and their nails and their mail. The sky was that hard blue we get in late spring before the heat settles. There was dust in the road from the night wind. And then somebody said her name, low, like a question, and the whole boardwalk turned at once. She was sitting up on the seat of a fine black surrey, gloved hands easy on her lap, looking at the town the way you'd look at an old grave you weren't sure you wanted to find. Behind her came a second wagon, loaded and roped down, and two riders, and a girl of about 11 with Vera's exact mouth. 12 years she'd been gone. 12 years since they put her out of this town with nothing but the dress she stood in and a shame that wasn't hers to carry. And here she sat, dressed better than the banker's wife, with her own outfit behind her and her chin level, and not a soul on that boardwalk could make a sound. Old Prout dropped a sack of feed and didn't pick it up. I want to tell you the whole of it. The way it happened, not the way folks tell it now, all cleaned up and made into a lesson. Because I was there for the beginning, and I am ashamed of my part in it, and a person ought to say the true thing before they're too old to say anything at all. Let me take you back. Vera came to Sable Creek when she was 9. Her mother and father both went in the same winter. The lung sickness took her mother first. Then her father followed before the ground had even thawed enough to bury the first one proper. So they sent the child north to her only kin, her father's brother, Ezra Hale. Now you have to understand what Ezra was. He owned the freight line and a piece of the bank and most of the paper on the ranches for 40 miles. When Ezra Hale walked into the church, the preacher waited on him to sit before he started. He was not a cruel man in the way you'd think of cruel. He didn't beat his horses or kick dogs. His cruelty was quieter than that. It was the cruelty of a man who had decided early that the world was a ledger, and that everything in it could be put on one side or the other, debt or asset, and nothing in between. He took the girl in because blood was blood and folks were watching, but you could see he counted her a debt from the first day. She grew up in that big cold house on the hill with the green shutters. I used to see her come down to the creek on Sundays, alone, skipping stones, talking to herself the way lonely children do. I ran the boarding house then, and I was younger, and I had a soft spot for her I never quite let myself act on. God forgive me. I'd give her a slice of pie when she passed and tell her to run on home before her uncle missed her. She always thanked me like I'd handed her something gold. By the time she was 17, she had turned into the kind of girl a town doesn't quite know what to do with, not because she was wild. She was the opposite of wild. She was quiet and watchful and quick, and she had a way of looking straight at you that made grown men shift their feet. She read every book she could get her hands on. She could shoe a horse better than the men who claimed to teach her. And she was beautiful in a way that made the women nervous, though that wasn't her fault either. That was the year Asa Whitlock came back to Sable Creek. Asa was the blacksmith's boy. He'd gone off east at 15 to work the railroads and came home at 19 with shoulders like a barn door and a way with horses that bordered on witchcraft. People paid good money to have him gentle a green colt. He didn't break them the hard way with rope and quirt. He'd just stand in the corral, hours at a stretch, until the animal decided on its own to come to him. I watched him do it more than once. There was something in it that put a lump in your throat, and you couldn't say why. He and Vera found each other the way water finds the low place, both of them quiet, both of them outsiders in a town that thought it knew them. He'd come round the corral fence when she brought her uncle's horses down, and they'd talk, and I'd see her face change. A girl who never smiled started smiling. That's a dangerous thing in a small town. Smiles get noticed. I knew before most. The boarding house sits right on the road down to the smithy, and you see who walks where, and how slow they walk, and whether they're carrying anything in their hands or just looking for a reason to be there. I saw Vera find a lot of reasons that summer. I should have warned her. I think on that more than I'd like. Because here is the part folks forget. They didn't sneak around like thieves. They were courting the honest way in the open as much as two careful young people could be. Asa went up to that house on the hill, hat in his hands, and asked Ezra Hale for the right to call on his niece proper. He told me so himself, years later, and I believed him because Asa Whitlock never learned how to lie. And Ezra said no. Not because Asa was a bad man, because Asa was a blacksmith's son with $40 and a borrowed horse, and Vera, in Ezra's ledger, was an asset he meant to marry off to clear a debt or seal a deal. He'd had his eye on the Renfro boy. The Renfros had cattle and water rights, and Ezra wanted both. A blacksmith's son did not improve the position. So he forbade it, and he was sure that was the end of it, the way men like Ezra are always sure. It was not the end of it. I won't pretend I know every private thing that passed between those two young people, and it isn't my business or yours to imagine it. What I know is what the whole town came to know by the end of that next winter. Vera was carrying a child. She was 19 years old, unwed, and the niece of the proudest man in the territory. I found out the way the town found out, which was all at once, the way a dam goes. Somebody saw, somebody said, and by sundown there wasn't a kitchen in Sable Creek that wasn't chewing on it. I went up the hill that night. I don't know what I meant to do. Stand with her, I suppose. But the gate was locked and the green shutters were closed, and there was a lamp burning in the front room where I could see Ezra's shape, not moving, just sitting there in his chair like a judge waiting on a hanging. What happened in that house, I heard later from the girl who did their wash, who heard it through the wall and never got it out of her head. Ezra did not shout. That was the worst of it, she said. A man who shouts, you can stand against. Ezra spoke to that girl in a low, even voice like he was reading her account back to her. He told her she had cost him the Renfro match. He told her she had made the Hale name a joke in every saloon from here to Laramie. He told her that as far as the world would know, she had gone east to school, and that she would never set foot in his town again. She asked him where she was supposed to go. And Ezra Hale, her own blood, the man who took her in at 9, said, "That is no longer my concern." They put her out 3 days later before the dawn, so the town wouldn't see. But I saw. I was up early, like I always was, raking the ash from the stove, and I heard the wagon on the road, and I went to the window. There was the Hale freight wagon, and there was Vera up on the seat next to the driver, a man named Dell who hauled for Ezra and would do anything for $1 and not ask why. She had one carpet bag. One. After 10 years in that house, they let her leave with one bag and the coat on her back. And she was 5 months gone, you could see it now, and the morning was cold enough that the puddles had skinned over with ice. I ran out in my apron. I didn't think. I just ran. I got to the road as the wagon came even with the boarding house, and I called her name. She looked down at me, and I will carry that look to my grave. There was no anger in it. I almost wish there had been. There was just a kind of tiredness too big for a girl that young, and under it, way down, something that hadn't given up yet, though God knows it had every reason to. "Where will he take you?" I said. "Dell says the rail station at Pierce," she said. "After that, I don't know." I had $11 saved in a coffee tin, and I didn't even go back for it. That's how my mind was working, or wasn't. I just pulled the shawl off my own shoulders and pushed it up into her hands. A wool shawl, as if a shawl could answer for what was being done to her. She took it. She held it against her like it was the warmest thing in the world. And she said, I remember every word she said, "Thank you, Mrs. Tilley. You were always kind to me." Past tense, like she was already gone, like she was reading her own account back the way her uncle had taught her. Then Dell shook the reins and the wagon went on down the road, and I stood in the cold with my arms bare and watched it get small, and I did not have the courage to follow. That's the truth. I went back inside and I made breakfast for 6 paying men and I served it with a steady hand. And inside I was screaming, and I never said one word. That's the kind of thing a town does. Not one big villain. 100 small cowardices, mine right there in the middle of them. Now here is something nobody knew until much later, and it matters, so I'll tell it plain. Asa Whitlock did not abandon her. The story that went around, the story Ezra wanted to go around, was that the blacksmith's boy had got the girl in trouble and run off east to dodge the consequence. That's what everybody believed. I believed it myself for years, and it shamed me when I learned different. What truly happened was this. When Ezra found out about the child, before he ever put Vera out, he sent 2 men down to the smithy in the night. They didn't beat Asa. They didn't have to. They put a paper in front of him, debts his father owed the Hale Bank, the mortgage on the smithy, the whole of it. And they told him that the day he so much as spoke Vera's name again, the Whitlocks would be put out on the road same as her, the old man and all. And then they told him Vera had already agreed to it. That she'd chosen the family name over him, that she wanted him gone. He didn't believe it, so they gave him a letter. In her hand, they said. I've come to think Ezra had it forged or twisted some real note of hers because that man could buy any skill he needed. Asa read words in Vera's own writing telling him to go and not look back, that she was ashamed, that it had been a mistake. A 19-year-old boy with his father's whole life held over his head, reading that. What would you have done? He left. He went east on the rails he knew, and he worked, and he sent money home quiet to save the smithy, and he believed for years that the girl he loved had thrown him over. 2 young people, both lied to, both told the other had quit them, set against each other by a man with a ledger for a heart. That's the part of the story that ought to make you angriest. It does me. For a long while, nobody in Sable Creek heard a single thing about Vera. She'd gone into the country the way a stone goes into a lake, with a splash and then nothing. Ezra told folks she was at a school for young ladies back in Ohio. After a year, he stopped saying even that. Her name just dropped out of the talk, the way names do. New scandals came along. The town went on. But the country is bigger than Sable Creek, and word travels in it, slow and crooked, like water through sand. The first I heard came maybe 4 years on, from a cattle buyer passing through who'd been down near the Colorado line. He was talking horses, the way those men do, and he mentioned a spread down there that was raising the finest saddle stock he'd seen in 20 years, run by a widow woman named Boone and a younger partner. Sharp as a tack, this partner, he said. Drove a hard bargain and never blinked. Pretty too, he said, but you'd think twice before you tried to cheat her. I didn't think anything of it then. Why would I? It took me years and a lot of pieces before I put it together, and I only got the whole picture from Vera's own mouth the day she came back. So let me give it to you the way she gave it to me, sitting in my kitchen with a cup of my coffee going cold in front of her, that grown woman where the girl used to be. Dell put her off at the rail station at Pierce like he was told and drove away, and there she was. 19, 5 months along, $11 she didn't have and a shawl that wasn't hers. She had 2 days of sitting on that station bench, she said, before a wagon stopped that would change her life, though it didn't look like much at the time. It was a widow named Hattie Boone, hauling supplies south to a little horse place she'd been trying to keep alive since her husband died. Hattie was 60 if she was a day, hard as a hickory knot, with a mouth on her that peel paint. She saw a pregnant girl sitting on a bench in the cold with one bag and no future, and she did the thing the whole town of Sable Creek hadn't done. She stopped. You got people? Hattie asked her. No, ma'am, Vera said. You got money? No, ma'am. You afraid of work? No, ma'am. Hattie looked at her a while. Then she said, get in. I can't pay you, but I can feed you, and if you're lying about the work part, you can walk home. She wasn't lying about the work part. Vera had the baby that summer in Hattie Boone's front room, a girl, and she named her Nell after her own dead mother. And then she did the only thing she knew how to do, which was work and watch and learn. She'd grown up shoeing Ezra Hale's horses and reading every book in his house, and it turned out those were exactly the two things that little failing horse place needed. She knew the animals, and she knew numbers. Hattie had the land and the knowledge and the heart, but she couldn't read a contract to save her life, and the buyers had been skinning her for years. That stopped the first season. Vera was there. I'll skip ahead because the middle of it was just years of hard work, and there's no quick way to tell hard work except to say it was hard, and it was years. But the short of it is this. By the time Nell was old enough to ride, the Boone place wasn't failing anymore. It was the best-known saddle stock operation in 3 counties. Hattie put Vera's name on the deed beside her on the year before she passed, left her the whole of it. In fact, having no children of her own and calling Vera the only family she'd picked instead of being stuck with. And so a girl who'd been put out of Sable Creek with one carpet bag and a borrowed shawl became, by her own 2 hands and one old woman's mercy, a woman of property and standing and means. She could have stayed down there. She had everything a body needs. She had her girl, her land, a good name in her own country. But there was business unfinished up north, and Vera Hale was her uncle's blood in one way at least. She did not leave a ledger unbalanced. Here is how she came to come back, and it has its own piece of cruel chance in it, like the whole story does. The cattle market broke. You'll remember it if you're old enough. The bad years when the bottom fell out and half the big outfits in the territory went under in 18 months. Ezra Hale held paper on most of them. When they couldn't pay him, his bank couldn't pay its own notes, and the proud man who'd run Sable Creek for 30 years found himself, at the end, on the wrong side of his own ledger. The bank failed. The freight line was sold for debts, and the big cold house on the hill with the green shutters went up for sale to satisfy his creditors. Ezra Hale rattling around in it alone now, his wife long dead, the Renfro boy he'd schemed for grown and gone and not returning his letters. The sale notice ran in the papers all the way to the Colorado line. And a woman down south read it over her morning coffee, and she set the paper down, and she told her daughter to pack. That's the wagon that came up the road that Tuesday. That's why the boardwalk went quiet. Because most of those men hadn't connected the fine woman on the Surrey seat to the disgraced girl they'd watched put out 12 years before until somebody said her name, and then it landed on the whole town at once. What was happening, what she had become, and why she had come. She'd come to buy the house, the Hale house. She'd come to buy it out from under the man who threw her away. I was on the boardwalk that morning. I'm an old woman now and I don't move fast, but I moved that day. I got down off the walk into the road and I stood there as the Surrey came even, the way I'd stood 12 years before, and I didn't know if she'd even know me. She stopped the team. She looked down at me a long moment, and then her face did the thing I'd waited 12 years to see and never thought I would. It came apart, just for a second, into the face of that girl who used to thank me for pie like I'd handed her gold. "Mrs. Tilly," she said. "Vera," I said, and that was all I could get out. She climbed down off that Surrey in her fine traveling coat, and she took both my hands in hers, and she said, "You gave me your shawl. I still have it. I've kept it 12 years. And the 2 of us stood there in the road and cried like fools while the whole town watched and didn't know what to do with itself. Now I'll tell you about the part everybody really wanted to see, which was Vera and her uncle, face to face. It happened at the land office, the day of the sale. Ezra was there because a man whose house is being sold has to be there to sign it away. He was old now and thin, and the proudness had gone strange on him, gone brittle, the way a fine thing goes when it cracks but hasn't quite fallen apart. He sat in a chair by the wall and didn't look at the door. And Vera walked in. The room was full, half the town had crowded in, smelling what was coming. The agent read out the terms. The bidding, what little there was, didn't last. Vera Hale put down a number nobody else in that room could touch in cash, and it was done in under a minute. The house on the hill was hers. Then she walked across the room to where her uncle sat, and the room held its breath. I have thought 1,000 times about what I'd have said in her place. Every hard thing, every true thing, 12 years of cold mornings I'd have laid at his feet. Vera stood in front of Ezra Hale and she looked down at him, the same straight look she'd had as a girl, the one that made grown men shift their feet. And she said, quiet, so the room had to lean in. You told me where I went was no longer your concern. I came back to tell you where I went. I went to a woman who stopped her wagon. I built a life you'd have respected if you hadn't been too small to see it. And I raised your great-niece into someone who will never know what it is to be turned out in the cold by her own blood. Ezra's mouth worked. Nothing came. I'm not going to put you out, Vera said. I thought I wanted to. I came all this way thinking I wanted to watch you stand in the road the way you made me stand in the road. But I have a daughter watching me right now, and I won't teach her your lessons. She set a paper down on the table beside him. The deed people thought, but it wasn't. There's a room at the Boone place, she said. Hattie would have hated it and she'd have done it anyway, so I'm doing it for her. You can live out your days there, fed and warm, and you can earn your keep mucking stalls like an honest man, which I expect you've never done a day in your life. Or you can stay here and freeze on the pride that's all you've got left. That's your choice to make. It is. And here her voice did not shake at all, no longer my concern. And she turned and walked out into the sun, and the room let out its breath all at once, like a congregation after the last Amen. He went south in the end. Old Ezra Hale. He mucked stalls at his niece's ranch for the 4 years he had left, and folks down there said he got quiet and almost gentle near the end, the way the cracked brittle ones sometimes do when there's nothing left to protect. Whether he ever said he was sorry, I don't know. Vera never told me and I never asked. Some accounts you don't get to read. But I haven't told you the last of it. The part that makes an old woman believe, against all the evidence of her long life, that the world isn't only a ledger. Esau Whitlock. He'd come back to Sable Creek years before, when his father died and left him the smithy. He was a grown man by then, quiet still, with gray coming into his hair early the way grief brings it. He never married. He worked his iron and gentled his horses, and he believed all those years that the girl he loved had thrown him over and gone east and forgotten him. He'd made a kind of peace with it, the flat gray peace of a man who's decided not to hope for anything anymore. He was at the corral fence the afternoon Vera drove out to look at the smithy. She had business there, ironwork for the house. He didn't know she was coming. He turned around and there she was. I wasn't there for it. I'm glad I wasn't. Some things shouldn't have a crowd. But Nell was there, 11 years old and sharp as her mother, and she told me about it later, eyes wide. She said the two of them just stood there, a long time, not saying anything. She said her mother's hand was shaking, and then her mother said one thing, just one, and it was a question. You read a letter, Vera said, in my hand telling you to go. And Esau Whitlock, who'd carried that letter against his chest for 12 years like a stone, said, yes. I never wrote it, she said. And Nell told me her mother and that big quiet man stood in the dust by the corral and figured out, in the space of about 3 sentences, that they'd both been lied to, that neither one had quit the other, that every cold year between them had been built on one man's forged paper and 2 young people too frightened and too far apart to ever check the other's word. 12 years, gone on a lie they could have torn up in a single afternoon if anyone had let them. You'd think a person would be angry, and maybe they were, somewhere down deep at Ezra, at the whole machine of it. But Nell said what she mostly remembered was that her mother started to laugh and cry at the same time, and the man did too, these 2 grown people undone in a horse corral. And then he reached out and brushed the dust off her shoulder, real careful, like